It's a streak. We may have taken the holiday off, but the Clippers didn't. Tonight's preposterous excuse for a basketball game ended with the Clippers beating the Timberwolves by 26. That makes 5 in a row for the Clippers. Fred Katz's here to talk about it, and 2 guests joining me on tonight's show as opposed to the usual one. In Minneapolis, kind enough to join us, writer for Rolling Stone, A Wolf Among Wolves, Grantland, 1500 ESPN, and every other place on the internet or publication or radio or any other kind of media is Steve McPherson. Steve, good to have first time on the show.
Hey, long time person who knows you, first time person who's on this show.
And in LA, longtime person who knows me, longtime person on the show, Patrick James.
Howdy, folks.
So let's catch up a little bit on what we missed, because we were off for the Thanksgiving holiday, and in the meantime, the Clippers decided to get a little bit hot, go on a 5-game winning streak, and all of a sudden they're 12-5 and somehow still at the bottom of the playoff picture because the Western Conference is just outrageous. But Patrick, how encouraged are you by this 5-game winning streak? I mean, tonight 26-point game, and they've looked good, especially 6-1 on the road trip too.
Yeah, they have looked good. I don't want to be a wet blanket about it, but they haven't beaten anybody. At the same time, you can only play the people that's on your schedule. So they rattled off a really nice set of victories in the sense that their margin of victory has been really big, and the offense has looked a little bit more like the Clipper offense that we saw last year when it was the most efficient in the league. You want to see them do it against the best teams in the league, and you want to see. I mean, really, you want to see them be near the top of the West in terms of their ranking. Maybe that doesn't even matter this year going into the playoffs. Just getting in is what matters because the competition is going to be so tough. I don't know that they've done anything that really matters with regard to wing defense. I don't know how they're going to address that issue yet. But it's cool to see them win, at least to kind of win the games they're supposed to, which is something they didn't look like they were capable of doing to start the season. So that at least is trending in the right direction. They're winning the games they should win.
Steve, I'm curious to get your opinion on this because you're stuck in apparently 5-degree Minnesota, which does not sound like a thing, but I guess it is. But you follow the whole. You guys have cable there? Is it too cold for cable? Or
it's all telegrams. It's all Morse code. I just get play-by-play via Morse code. So
that's I'm sure Clyde Frazier sounds amazing in Morse code.
Fantastic.
What's your opinion on this Clippers team with the struggles early and then kind of how they've looked lately?
Well, certainly this this winning streak they're on right now looks really good. I always sort of thought that they had they obviously have the pieces to be really good. Before the season started, it seemed to me that they're in that tough spot where they're trying to go from being very good to sort of taking that next step up. Which is it's sort of a dark art, I think, in the NBA, because you see a bunch of teams that have sort of floated around being good, like the Thunder, but then, they get to a finals, but then they get knocked out of the playoffs the next year. And so, navigating that path is difficult. And the Clippers, I think, obviously have such a talented roster. I mean, especially you're looking at, just looking at Jordan and Griffin and Chris Paul, terrific players. But how do you get to that next level, and what does it take? Obviously, the Donald Sterling stuff, took its toll on them last season. But now it's kind of like there's nothing in their way like that. I was listening to the Wolves broadcast, and Jim Peterson was talking about, how Steve Ballmer's just been like, what do you need, to Doc Rivers, and we'll get it for you. And so in some ways, it's like having all that laid in front of you, that's its own challenge, because suddenly you don't have constraints in some of the same ways. So, I think they've looked really good. I hope they hold it together, because I think they're a tremendously fun team to watch play, especially when they're disassembling a team that looks as discombobulated as the Wolves do, as they did tonight.
Yeah, we'll talk about tonight's game in 1 second, but just adding on a point that you made, I forget who, someone wrote this. Actually, Blake Griffin may have said this, but in one of those long form interviews he did in the preseason. But he mentioned, or someone mentioned, that last year's training staff really wanted this new medical technology, and Sterling wouldn't splurge for it because it was more expensive. And it was kind of more of the new age stuff that I think it was stuff that the Spurs use. And all of a sudden, as soon as Ballmer came in, Blake Griffin showed up on the first day of training camp, and the whole medical staff had their new pieces of technology and the new stuff that they wanted to use for the players to measure heart rates and practices and all of that kind of stuff, and everyone was just happier with it. And it's that kind of stuff which can make a difference down the line. But let's talk about tonight's game, because the Clippers won by 26. And Steve, did Minnesota look like they came out to play at all?
Well, they looked good in the first quarter. You know, they had a pretty decent first quarter. But then as soon as they started digging into the bench, it was sort of a replay of what happened with the Blazers last night, where, you know, Minnesota ended up the first quarter up on the Blazers last night, and then, you know, Zach LaVine came in, some more of the bench came in, and they just couldn't hold it together, and then they could never get it back. And that's essentially kind of what happened tonight. You know, again, they ended the first quarter up, but that was about as much as they could get out of the team tonight. I think it is a really rough stretch for the Wolves for a lot of reasons, and it's not getting any easier because, you know, Patrick was saying that the Clippers have been beating the teams they're supposed to beat. The Wolves are about to face a whole bunch of teams, aside from Philly. They're playing Philly on Wednesday, hopefully not giving Philly their first win. But they go on to face some rough opponents who are all Western Conference contenders, I think, over the next several games. So it's going to be kind of a tiring, exhausting stretch for the Wolves.
So the Wolves were just kind of, I guess you mentioned that they were good in the first. They looked like they tired, which I guess is possible because they were on the second night of a back-to-back. Patrick, what did you see from this game?
Yeah, I mean, I saw one of the weird things was that the Wolves did, you know, given that the Wolves did look good in the first quarter, and they were really giving Clippers a run for their money, one of the weird things was that the Clippers actually seemed to turn up the defense when the bench came in. Not in a wholesale, like across the board way, but there were just like a couple plays where like the momentum seemed to shift. Griffin has been, I feel like, lost on defense a lot this year, which is odd because last year it seemed like he made real strides in that department, especially in a team defense kind of scenario, like making rotations and communicating and kind of being in the right place at the very least and having your hands up. And this year I've seen a lot less of that. So sometimes, as insane as it sounds, having Glenn Davis come in the beginning of the second quarter can kind of energize the Clippers. And I kind of saw that a little bit tonight. And just saying that out loud, that feels like it must be a little bit backbreaking for a team to have Glenn Davis come in and like change the trajectory of the game.
There was a great, at the end of the third quarter, the Clippers were at 98 points, and they were one basket away from Lawler's Law. And Glenn Davis, I forget who the defender was, and Glenn Davis and Spencer Hawes came over and set picks on the defender, and Farmer came over and hit a popping Hawes, and Hawes hit a three at the end of the quarter to make it 101. And the defender just kind of just stood there, and I think everyone was zoned out at this point. Just kind of really stood there. Hawes was wide open, didn't really know what to do. And I just imagined what it's like being sandwiched between a really sweaty big baby and Spencer Hawes. Sounds like, why are you going to do anything? You're already down like 25 points. That's horrible. Yeah, Steve, say whatever you wanted to say. There's no way to segue from that.
Yeah, no, the thing about Glenn Davis, which I think, as I said on Twitter during the game, that I was like that his chin strap is not fooling anybody. Like, it's just a straight line from his face down into his neck, basically, at this point. but the thing is he's big, and obviously Big Baby being his name, and he looks that name again now. The Wolves, for their part, since they're missing, Pekovic is not a great defender, but he's thick. He's a hard body to move around down there in the post. Whereas Gorgui Dieng, who's a better defender in a lot of ways, is really a weak side defender. And the problem is that when he gets banged by opposing centers, he gives up ground. So the Wolves are looking at right now, their tallest player is Dieng, who's 6'11", but he's not super strong in the post. The next tallest player is like 6'9", I think, is Corey Brewer, and he's a willow. He's a willow branch, So you're getting into their power forwards are guys like, Thad Young, who's 6'8", Jeff Adrian, who they just signed because they needed somebody else, is 6'7" and plays power forward, and he's a little stronger, but still, it's like the thing is, like, you put in a guy like Big Baby, he's just big. He's just bigger than anybody that the Wolves have, on their roster to throw out there. So I can see how that could kind of tire them out and push them around in a way that maybe Blake Griffin isn't doing as much right now.
Yeah,
and once that happened, then when you get Griffin coming back in the game, more so even in the third quarter than the second, is you just saw that kind of size and strength difference was it was pretty apparent. I mean, Griffin was getting to the hoop, and they were getting into space that they wanted, and it's just, Corey Brewer is on Griffin because of a switch. Mo Williams is on Griffin because of a switch, and it's just kind of like that's when the slaughter kind of happens. For whatever wherever we are with Griffin on the elite power forward rankings thing, he seems to be very good at taking advantage of a mismatch when he gets a mouse in the house on him, and kind of that's not something that he's dealing with or struggling with at this point in his career.
Let's talk a little bit about some other guys today. So I want to know, Steve, who's your player of the game from today? We got Redick had 23 points in 23 minutes and looked really good, I thought. Griffin had 23 and 8. DJ had a double-double in 26 minutes. Zach LaVine still sounds as Jewish as ever.
Well, I mean, obviously, I eventually started watching the Clippers because the Wolves were just too depressing to pay attention to. But I have been really impressed with Shabazz Muhammad, and after looking like, after falling in the draft and then going to the Wolves and people not liking the pick, and then looking okay in certain spurts last season, he's just been sort of a revelation off the bench for the Wolves. And he has trouble with schemes, which is sort of the thing with him, is that he's all energy, all hustle all the time. This means he's out of position a lot. So I think he's got to learn how to navigate that motor. But he had 18 points tonight, I think, and 10 or 11 rebounds. So his first double-double of his career, and a career high in rebounds and an assist. He had 4 assists. So, it's kind of surprising that right now, in a lot of ways, he's looking like the most developed young player. Wiggins has had, some really good games, but Shabazz has sort of shown the most consistency, which is really weird if you've followed Shabazz at all through his career so far. So, good on him for working hard on that stuff.
Well, he's always been mature for a young player.
There it is.
But, no, I always loved watching him rebound. I feel like he's just a fun guy to watch because he's not so tall. He doesn't jump out of the building necessarily, but I don't know. He's like, guys like that are kind of my favorite to watch rebound. And so there's something to like. There's a lot to like in that department with Shabazz. I think you have to go with Redick as like who kind of made his imprint on the game, just because he set the tone for the Clippers, who at least their offense was going to be running seamlessly, even if they were going to be an absolute nightmare on defense to start the game. And he had started the year. I think 6 of his first 10 games were just abysmal in terms of shooting. And if he's not shooting well, he's not giving you a lot else. The last 6 games, he's been significantly better. He's been making threes at a good clip, shooting, and even getting to the line a bit more than the first half of the season. So seeing him come out and shoot like this, it really just it's great as just to watch. But it's a little bit of a nightmare, I think, to defend, just because he's constantly in motion. It's not just the made shots, although the made shots are they have an impact, but the fact that he's constantly moving really, really kind of dictates what's happening on the floor.
Yeah, Patrick, that mature for his age joke is a 1%er right there. I mean, I wonder if one person watching the show got that. I don't even care. I really enjoyed it. Let's take a quick question, which is from, where are you? I had you up here somewhere. Now my eyesight's letting me down. Here we go, from West Ken in the comments section. On the Clippers podcast 2 weeks ago, Kevin Arnovitz and Jordan Heimer talked about a lack of a system. How are your thoughts about this in general after the road trip? Have they changed over the last couple of weeks? Patrick?
They look like they're a little bit more cohesive. There's a thing that happens, I think, when you travel with a bunch of guys as a team. You're kind of forced to bond a little bit. I mean, it sounds kind of like like a sports cliche, but it's a real thing. If it doesn't mean you're all like sitting around at the dinner table holding hands and talking about like how you're going to take the game to the next level. But I think there's like you're forced to bond in a way that you're not forced to when you're at home and they were largely at home for the beginning of the season, and everyone's going to their own houses when you're at home, like when you have a long home stretch. You go on the road for a little bit. You're hanging out together a lot. Your back's up against the wall, trying to get wins in tough environments. So maybe the absence of a system that was kind of apparent at the beginning of the season, the kind of closeness that a 7-game road trip kind of it kind of forces you to be close, and maybe the system revealed itself out of that. I do think the offense looks a lot better. I think there's a lot more motion. There's a lot more kind of like secondary action out of on plays. I even saw like one of our favorite kind of floppy sets, the kind of merry-go-round set. There were even a couple of those on the road trip, which I felt like we weren't seeing at all, which was like the go-to Clippers offense play last year, other than like a 1-4 pick and roll. So I don't know. Maybe it's coming together a little bit more. We need to see it happen over a longer stretch to really hail its return.
I guess I feel like it looks like a system to me because I'm watching the Wolves, who have there is just like it's like a mid-range shot generator, which is I have a foot at each camp with this, because there's a whole bunch of people who are just like, how come we don't take any three-pointers? And you look at, if you look at the three-point shooting tonight, which I have not looked at, but I know that the Wolves only had like 6 3-point shots through at least partway through the third quarter. So they're just not taking three-point shots. But they also have a lot of people who can make three-point shots, and I can appreciate with a bunch of young players, you want to get them shots that they feel confident in. It'd be great to see if Anthony Bennett could take some more outside shots, because he's shown himself to be able to hit those long mid-range shots, sort of like LaMarcus Aldridge style stuff. So, it's taking time. I think the Wolves are just trying to figure out what they've got. It's hard to say you're like, this is how we're going to build this system around players where they're not even the players they're going to be in a couple months. Things are going to change. So to me, the Clippers system, looks pretty good. That road trip thing, I think, is real. I was hoping that the Wolves went on this long road trip earlier in the season, down through the South and then into Mexico for a home game. And I was like, well, they'll get on the road, it'll be great. Then they came back and they didn't have Ricky Rubio and they didn't have Pekovic. And then Thaddeus Young was out for a good stretch of games, and it was like, oh, well, this had the opposite effect of this. So it was a lot. So in terms of road trips, it was a lot more like my 12th grade trip to Europe for 10 days, where we didn't so much develop a system as just develop a constant hangover, which is kind of where I think the Wolves are right about now.
We have a question from Patrick. You ready for this name?
Yes.
Good name. This name hasn't been said on this show for a long time. We have a question from the ghost of Andrew Hahn that just G-chatted me. And he wants to know, Patrick, I'll ask you first. What was the panic number before the road trip, and what is it now? And then he said, didn't it seem like people were freaking out?
Okay, I was freaking out, and I'm not totally over my freak out. The panic number was a 7 out of 10, and now I'm on the other side of 5, but like I'm still pretty worried. I still don't think the Clippers look anywhere near good enough to beat San Antonio, Golden State, or Memphis in a playoff series. I think they could beat Oklahoma City, but only because of the injuries, and that's assuming that their two players don't come back. If they come back and they look, I mean, well, we saw Westbrook so far, so I don't know. The panic meter is like I'm more in the middle, but at the beginning of the season, before we played any games, I was at like a 1, thinking like this is the year, and now I'm like, there might not be a year.
So basically, you're just everywhere.
Yeah, I'm all over the place. I'm totally irrational, and yeah, no, I mean it's better than it was, but it's still not great.
Steve, quickly before we go, I want to ask you. I want to get your take because the Wolves have a lot of young pieces, and you haven't even mentioned Andrew Wiggins' name yet. Wiggins didn't do that much tonight. He had that really nice alley-oop dunk, but
yeah, he's a little sick. He's recovering from food poisoning apparently, so.
He's well, that dunk was kind of sick as well. He's a freak athlete, ridiculous finisher. I love him. I think he's gonna be great. But what do you think of Wiggins so far? What do you think of Levine so far? And we talked about Muhammad, but the rest of them.
I think that Wiggins looks really good so far, and what I really like about him is how sort of patient he is with looking at the game. He doesn't seem like he's in a rush to prove himself, and I think that some people are going to look at that and be like he doesn't have the motor or whatever, but I don't necessarily buy into that. I think he's just he's got that kind of student of the game thing going on with him, where I think he's really trying to figure out how he can affect the game most through his defense, obviously, and then he's already shown great defense, I think, on a lot of players, and then flashes of offense. He sort of jumped out. He's had a lot of really good third quarters recently, which has made me wonder if he's as a starter, he sort of started and usually not been hot right out of the gate. Then he gets on the bench, he sort of sees what's going on in the game, and then he gets in and he'll sometimes get fired up about it. They were playing the Spurs a couple games ago, and they just started going to him again and again and again because the Spurs were blowing him out. So they just kept going to Andrew Wiggins, and he had like 9 points in a row on consecutive possessions. So I think it's there, but I think he's trying to figure out how to be most effective, and I think that's good. I don't think he should be in a rush. Levine is in a little more of a rush. He's also playing out of position as a point guard, which I think is not his natural position. I don't think he's going to end up as like a Westbrook type of point guard. I think he's really going to be a shooting guard. But I talked to him a little bit about it the other night, and sort of getting tossed into this role as a point guard. He was like, I haven't played point guard since high school, but I did play point guard in high school. How is it? And I asked him how if it could help him as a shooting guard. He was like, definitely, because learning the plays from that perspective makes him know where he's going to need to be as a shooting guard when he's the one coming off of screens to catch the ball. So I think you got to look at everything. I mean, I think it's funny you're talking about panic. Like that, your panic meter includes the idea of not making it out of the first round of the playoffs, whereas my panic meter is like, will they ever play a playoff game ever again in my lifetime? So I'm on a different level, like just my consideration of what the qualities of panic. It's like, we're not even going to sniff the playoffs this year, and I'm not even panicked. I'm like, okay, fine, whatever. So it lends itself to a sort of, laissez-faire, like whatever's going to happen, like see how this develops. Everything is a work in progress with the Wolves. If Bennett pans out, fantastic, because he was essentially sort of a throw-in into the deal as far as I'm concerned. And again, Muhammad has looked pretty good. So I'm pretty high on their potential pieces. I just think this season might have looked good if they hadn't suffered these injuries that happened right away. And now I think Flip has seen the writing on the wall that like this run of injuries is going to make it very difficult to compete. And so, throw the guys out there, see what happens.
Are you a Flip fan?
I think I'm more of a Flip fan as a GM than as a coach right now. I think he made a lot of really good moves as a GM. I think as a coach, he's doing a good job in terms of bringing along the players, and I think he's doing a good job in terms of developing some of the players. I don't think his system of playing basketball is an effective or efficient one in the NBA today. I mean, I think it was great back when Garnett was on the team, and it was sort of all about getting these pretty open mid-range jumpers. But I think we've come to a place where we sort of feel like even challenged three-pointers are better shots than nice-looking open mid-range jumpers. And I don't think he's the guy to teach that stuff. I mean, my hope is that they still have an eye towards hiring a coach who's going to be the next serious coach for the Wolves after this season. And if that's what Flip does, then I believe that if he steps aside, then I think that's the smartest thing for them to do. And I know they have their eye on a couple different people. I'm sure there's a lot of people they're talking to. I just hope he doesn't begin to feel like he needs to do both these jobs, because I think at this point he'd be much better off working as a GM and having somebody else come in who's younger, who's going to be a coach, who's going to fall in line with some of the sort of more advanced analytical ways of looking at basketball. So.
Flip fan sounds like the name of one of those mini fans you take to a baseball game on those really hot days. Water spray.
Yes.
Quickly before we go, Patrick, we made it back. How was your Thanksgiving?
It was good. I did the back-to-back thing at my wife's house, or my wife's parents' house, Thursday, and then my parents' house Friday. So I ate a lot. It was great. Lots of kids and food and dogs and stuff like that.
You did a back-to-back. If you were married to Greg Popovich, he wouldn't have taken you to his house the next day.
Well, I would have sat for the bigger audience, I guess. Right?
Right.
To prove the point. No, I'm not eating tonight.
Exactly. Well, Steve, thanks for coming on.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Patrick, always lovely to talk to you. That's going to do it for us tonight. Clippers take this one 121-101 over the Wolves. Clips are off tomorrow, but they welcome in the Magic on Wednesday evening. That game scheduled for 7:30 Pacific. It's on Fox Prime Ticket. For Patrick James and Steve McPherson, I'm Fred Katz. See you Wednesday.